Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Reiser in for Vladimir Duthier. We are watching all the news happening in the U.S. and around the world. If it's happening in one of these monitors, we are going to bring it to you live. This is CBS News 24/7. Three freed Americans back on U.S. soil after years of imprisonment in Russia. What we know about the complex prisoner swap and their long journey back home. An ominous warning from Hezbollah's leader about the conflict with Israel as fears of an all-out war in the region intensify. We're getting close to learning who presumptive Democratic nominee Kamala Harris will choose for a running mate. The latest movements from those on the short list. But first, we begin with an emotional reunion on U.S. soil. Three Americans wrongfully detained in Russia reunited with loved ones in Maryland late last night before heading to San Antonio, Texas. Paul Whelan, who had been held in Russia's prison for more than 5 years, told reporters it felt good to be home. Earlier today, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan joined CBS Mornings to discuss the successful efforts to secure the prisoner swaps deal.
This was a human victory. It was three innocent people coming home to their families, reunited with their loved ones, and that's a magical thing. But second, it was a victory for our country because this was the United States of America at its best, working with allies to free our citizens who were unjustly detained abroad, and also working to free freedom fighters from Russia, people who have dedicated their lives to democracy and human rights, and doing it because we stand for that principle. We are that shining city on a hill. And so yesterday was an extremely special day, and I do believe it's something that we should build on, and we should do so united as a country, believing in our people and also believing in our values.
Sullivan went on to say these sorts of release deals are difficult to make, but the president and the administration are proud of the call they made. CBS News New York reporter Christina Fan joins me now from outside the Wall Street Journal headquarters in New York City. So, Christina, we saw the very emotional reunions on the tarmac overnight. Where are the freed prisoners now?
Well, Lindsay, it has really been a whirlwind 24 hours for these three freed Americans. They initially first got off the plane in Maryland. That's where they were greeted by President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris there on the tarmac. There were a lot of happy hugs as well as tears. They were also greeted by friends and family there. And after that reunion, they got back on the plane and they are currently in San Antonio, Texas. They landed there, will be going to a military hospital for medical evaluation, again, as they finally readjust to life back here in the States. Now, we did hear from one of those freed Americans, Paul Whelan. Again, he is the former U.S. Marine, and among the three prisoners, he was held in Russia the longest since 2018, accused of spying. And I know you briefly mentioned off the top, he expressed that he kind of was still in a state of shock and didn't fully believe he was coming back home until the plane was flying over parts of England and Canada. And he said in remarks to reporters when he landed in Texas that he was so happy to be back home, and he wanted to thank all the officials, agencies, and people who helped make that happen. Lindsay?
And this took place in back channels really for months. What are we learning about how this went down?
Yeah, U.S. officials say not only months, this was years in the making. It took the cooperation of several countries. We know 7 at least. It includes the U.S. and Russia, of course, but also Germany, Poland, Turkey, and Norway. A total of 24 prisoners were exchanged. 8 went from Russia, 8 went from the West back to Russia, and 16 went from Russia back to various countries across the West. And we were told that the deal was dependent on the release of a suspected Russian spy. His name is Vadim Krazakov. He was serving a life sentence for murder in Germany. Now, in addition to Krazakov being returned to Russia, the U.S. also returned 3 Russians. They were accused of various charges, including fraud and cyber crimes here in the United States. Lindsay?
Okay, Christina Fan, thank you so much for joining us. Let's go now to CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman, who joins us now. Willie, you watched all of this unfold. You were reporting live as it was happening. What stuck out to you the most when those freed prisoners touched down on U.S. soil?
Hey there, Lindsay. Good to be with you. Well, you couldn't help but smile last night when you saw all 3 of those Americans get off the plane and embrace President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. This was a celebratory moment. The president noted as much in his statement to the press earlier in the day. He talked about family, and you saw the families there waiting on the tarmac for these three to arrive in the United States. In some cases, years. Paul Whelan had been waiting literally 6 years, nearly 6 years, to be back on U.S. soil. Of course, Evan Gershkovich and the other Americans waiting months or a year or more to be back here in the United States. And the president talking about relationships, those family relationships and why they matter. And he mentioned that yesterday in his statement. We know he is a family man, but he talked about those relationships with world leaders as well. And as we were just discussing, Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, was really key to all of this, as well as the Prime Minister of Slovenia as well, who the president talked with moments before, Lindsay, he dropped out of the presidential race. So the president working the phones before he made this shockwave of a decision on July 21st in Rehoboth Beach while recovering from COVID.
Just incredible details that are coming in about how all of this happened. Willie, James, Inman, thank you so much.
You bet.
Mourners gathered in Doha this morning for the funeral of Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh after he was killed in Iran this week. Both Iran and Hamas blame Israel for his death, and there are fears Haniyeh's death could stall efforts to secure a ceasefire and hostage release deal in Gaza. Our Deborah Pata has more.
It's been more than 300 days of constant anxiety, and it's taking its toll on the families and friends of loved ones in Gaza. But still, they continue to march for their release. Many feel they've been abandoned, and hopes for a ceasefire have given way to fears of a wider war. One family member told us they worry day in and day out as they have no idea what could happen next. The assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader Israel was negotiating with, has dealt a severe blow to ceasefire talks. President Biden called it unhelpful and told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to get a deal done. Hamas says an Israeli strike killed Haniyeh in Tehran. The New York Times reports it was a bomb smuggled into the house he was staying in 2 months before the assassination. Israel has not claimed responsibility, but is braced for retaliation from Iran. While in war-torn Gaza, Palestinians know Haniyeh's assassination will only lead to more deaths. President Biden also discussed with Prime Minister Netanyahu American military deployment to help protect against a possible retaliatory attack. In April, U.S. forces intercepted dozens of missiles and drones fired by Iran against Israel, helping to down nearly all of them. Lindsay?
Deborah, thank you. The U.S. government says it recognizes opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez as the winner of Venezuela's presidential election. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in a statement there was overwhelming evidence Gonzalez won, despite President Nicolas Maduro claiming victory. CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano has been following the latest for us. So, Lilia, you obviously were in Venezuela the last few days. You saw all of this go down. You saw the unrest. How do you think this is being received there, and what happens next?
Well, Lindsay, there's been a great deal of gratitude coming from the public in Venezuela who support the opposition, and from Edmundo González Urrutia as well. He thanked in a tweet Secretary Blinken for his support and for supporting what he calls a process to restore democratic norms in Venezuela. We have not heard a response directly to what Blinken stated from President Nicolás Maduro quite yet. But he yesterday released some of the points in an agreement that was made prior to the election, trying to highlight, first of all, stating that he is willing to resume talks with the United States or communication with the United States, and highlighting how the U.S. had said that or agreed that they would support the results of a democratic election. But of course, that would require that the election is democratic. And as you heard, what Blinken is saying, it is not. Today, we are waiting to see if Edmundo González Urrutia, who is in hiding, as well as Maria Corina, will show up because the Supreme Court there in Venezuela called all of the candidates to serve as witnesses in a hearing that will happen today. We're not very sure if I tried to check and see if he's going to show up or not. But at this time, there's a great deal of concern for his and Maria Corina Machado, the leader of the opposition, who was supposed to be the candidate but was banned from running by the government. They're concerned for their safety and their freedom. Last night at 3 a.m., apparently masked people, we don't know who it was, but masked armed gangs showed up at his campaign headquarters and threatened the guards who were there. So there's tension. There's going to be mass protests for both sides on Saturday. And between now and then, just going by the history and the calls from the government to arrest both of them, blaming or accusing them of inciting violence, there's concern that Edmundo and Maria Corina could end up behind bars or remain in hiding, and potentially, as has happened in the history of opposition leaders, in exile.
Okay, Lilia, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us. Moving to politics now and the Donald Trump J.D. Vance campaign. We know that Trump and Vance continue to hammer home the issues that they believe will help them to the White House, including the economy and immigration. Vance in particular raising doubts about Harris's focus on the root causes of immigration. Vance spoke to CBS News while touring the U.S.-Mexico border in Arizona.
I think the root causes of illegal immigration are that Kamala Harris refuses to do her job. And that's what we have to focus on.
CBS News campaign reporter Jake Rosen is in Atlanta with more on the Trump campaign. So, Jake, you were at the border with Vance. Tell us about the visit and whether his message is resonating with voters.
Well, that's right. I was with J.D. Vance yesterday in southern Arizona, where he got a border briefing from local officials down in Cochise County. And he also talked to the press about why Kamala Harris's border policies were wrong. Now, that's notable, Lindsay, because he left Joe Biden completely out of his remarks. And in that short interview I got with him that you just aired a clip of, he also left out Joe Biden. It was all about Harris, as you've seen from Donald Trump's public statements and True Social statements, in addition to this new angle that J.D. Vance is taking, going to the border proactively just weeks after being named Trump's running mate. You know, the focus is on Kamala Harris and what she was assigned to do by Joe Biden in relation to immigration and the border, and what they say she has not done.
You know, I want to talk to you about the fallout which continues over Trump's comments on Harris's ethnicity during a visit to the National Association of Black Journalists conference earlier this week. How are those comments being received in GOP circles? And what can you tell us about new CBS News reporting that Trump's delay over the stage, which he lamented once he took the stage, was a little bit over an audio issue, but mainly over his opposition to fact-checking being part of the panel?
So Donald Trump has always been resistant to live fact-checking. This has been a complaint that he's had going back to previous presidential debates, other interviews. As you probably noticed, and our audience probably notices, a lot of the interviews that he does, if they're not with, quote, friendly media, are usually pre-taped and usually a day or two ahead of time, so that there's time for him to get out what he wants to say to those interviewees. And my colleague and your colleague, Cecilia Vega, reported that that delay was because Donald Trump was resistant to Rachel Scott, Kadia Goba, and Harris Faulkner live fact-checking him on stage. The campaign told me it was because of the delay in the first place, and that they need to get to Harrisburg, where the rally was on Wednesday. But this kind of fallout and back and forth is continued.
Okay, Jake Rosen, thank you. Well, a huge fundraising haul for Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign. Team Harris reports it raised $310 million in July alone. It now has a $377 million war chest. So this total means that Harris's campaign has raised more than $1 billion since it launched, the fastest collection in presidential history. The news comes ahead of a highly anticipated announcement from Harris on who she will choose as her running mate. Sources tell CBS News 6 people have had calls with the Harris campaign's VP vetting team this week. Katrina Kaufman joins us now from Minnesota. She's a CBS News campaign reporter and attorney. Katrina, good to see you. So Harris is slated to campaign in major battleground states next week. It's a pretty grueling schedule. Do we have any indication of how close Harris is to making this decision?
As you mentioned, Lindsay, she has narrowed this down to 6 top contenders. We know that they are undergoing the vetting process. It's also been said that the law firm that was investigating each of them has finished their process as well. So in the coming days, we've seen that some of them have cleared their schedules. For example, Josh Shapiro was set to appear at a fundraiser in the Hamptons. He has canceled that. Andy Bashir also canceled an event this weekend. J.B. Pritzker was joking on television that he had planned to perform at Lollapalooza this weekend, but he's not going to anymore. And Tim Walz from here in Minnesota, who's also a contender, is actually, I've been told by sources, set to appear with Harris at a campaign rally on Sunday in New Hampshire. But she has had very little time to make this decision. Normally, the VP vetting process takes months. She has a matter of weeks, and we know that she absolutely has to make this decision before August 7th. And of course, she's beginning that battleground tour on Tuesday with whoever she chooses. So we should know very soon who this VP pick is going to be.
Yeah, running up not only against that deadline, but time to be able to introduce the entire ticket to the electorate. So, Katrina, what does Harris's fundraising tell you? I mean, is this a reflection of the enthusiasm sort of at this moment in time? Is something like that sustainable?
Lindsay, she has absolutely energized the party. And with that huge fundraising haul you were talking about, a lot of these are first-time donors. A lot of them are young donors. 60% of the donors in July were women. Many were nurses and teachers, and it's yet to be seen if she can sustain this, but there are some events coming up that could lead to fundraising spikes. For example, when she announces the VP pick we were just talking about. There's also the Democratic National Convention coming up, and potentially if Trump will in fact debate Kamala Harris, which is now up in the air, that could lead to more fundraising as well. And in fact, here in Minnesota, I was meeting with someone just yesterday from a local Democratic organization, and they were saying that they broke all of their records when Harris became the presumptive nominee. In the first 24 hours, they broke their fundraising record. In the next 24 hours, they broke that record. They've had more volunteers than ever. So if on a local level, this is an example of what we're going to see nationally, it's very possible that she will, in fact, be able to keep up this momentum.
All right, Katrina, thank you. Well, crews continue to battle the park fire in California as officials say wildfire activity is more than 2,000% higher in the state than this time last year. We're going to take you there next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Well, the park fire continues to burn in California as high temperatures and dry conditions have really just fueled these flames, and it has already been ranked among the top 5 largest in California state history. CBS News Bay Area reporter Kevin Coe joins me now. Kevin, thank you for being with us. Where do efforts stand right now?
Well, Lindsay, I do want to share with you, because you mentioned that top 5 with the park fire, right? This morning here in Northern California, we now know that it is the 4th largest wildfire in California state history. More acreage is burning, but we got 6,300 firefighters, more than that actually, just right behind me, up Highway 32, closer to the fire, battling the flames. However, they are facing an uphill battle with Mother Nature. Let me explain, but first, just starting with what you may be able to see around me, right? The smoke, the air quality, unhealthy, hazardous, according to air quality indexes. But I also do want to mention the visibility is just absolutely poor. Aircrafts right now, they are not able to get over significant portions of the park fire. Obviously, a major hurdle for firefighters. You mentioned the heat, though. Upper 90s into the hundreds expected today, into the weekend, and really into next week as well. Moisture levels very, very low, very dry, like you mentioned, too, and also the potential for thunderstorms. That can cause erratic fire behavior. Currently, right now, we are nearing 400,000 acres burnt from the park fire with 24% containment.
Wow, those are not good conditions, and thanks for bringing us that breaking news of it now being in the top 4. Before we let you go, in Southern California, the Nixon fire is burning. How big of a concern is that right now?
When you compare it to what's happening here, it sounds like firefighters in Southern California have a better handle on it. But I do want to point out that there are evacuation orders in 2 counties. Keep in mind, the Nixon fire started in Riverside County. Anyone familiar with the Los Angeles area knows that's the Inland Empire, the IE, right? It started in Riverside County, but it's been moving and creeping into San Diego County, which is why you have evacuation orders in both of those counties. However, firefighters reported as of this morning that they actually have an increase in moisture levels. They will at least be tackling that fire for the next several days, but compared to here in Northern California, looking like a much brighter picture down south.
Okay. Kevin, a little bit of good news. Thank you. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with a look at the national forecast. We go from the heat and the wildfire conditions out west to a tropical depression with its sights set on Florida.
Oh, for sure, Lindsay. Yeah, good morning. Good morning to you at home. Keeping a close eye on the tropics, where the last couple of days, things have been relatively stagnant in terms of the development of this invest or this tropical wave. Right there at the bottom of the globe, this is the wave that's currently moving through Hispaniola over Cuba, but it begins to track toward Florida as we head through the next couple of days. It's really going to be something to watch. We just got an update from the National Hurricane Center saying, look, we got to watch this thing closely. In fact, they're going to begin to issue advisories on this as a potential tropical cyclone beginning at 11 o'clock this morning. There's the system that we're tracking, bringing heavy rainfall to portions of eastern Cuba this morning. We're expecting it to develop once it begins to move into that hashed area, so just north of Cuba, but really as it begins to move into the warm waters of the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Again, at 11 o'clock this morning, the National Weather Service or the National Hurricane Center will begin to issue advisories, which means we'll get a cone out of it. It won't be a tropical depression. It won't be a tropical storm, but they are expecting it to become one, and that could happen as early as this weekend. Right now, over the next 7 days, about a 90% chance that it develops, and that probably really doesn't begin to take shape until the system tracks east of the Florida Peninsula. But even as it meanders along the Florida Peninsula, especially through Saturday, Sunday into early next week, it will bring very heavy rainfall. Some places in southwestern Florida, Marco Island, could pick up between 5 to 6 inches of rain. St. Pete, Tampa Bay area could see 4 to even 6 inches of rain. As the system tracks up to the north and east, as it moves off the southeast coast from Georgia, South Carolina, that's when we could start to see that real tropical development from a tropical depression, tropical storm, and some models even indicating the possibility of a hurricane. It will really be something to watch. Once that potential tropical cyclone advisory comes down at 11 o'clock, we'll be able to have a cone for you and show you where the National Hurricane Center is keeping an eye on this system and where it could track. Still a lot of uncertainty in that 3 to 5 day forecast. Meanwhile, you've got the heat out west and you've got the ongoing heat wave across the southern plates into the northeast. Look at this, 184.4 million people underneath some sort of heat alert today. That's even more than yesterday, and that's more than half of the population of the United States. The heat is a big deal, and it's also the humidity across the southeast. Look at this. Feels like temperatures 105 to 110. Look at that. Up towards Birmingham, Alabama, 101. Even as far northeast as New York City today, feeling like the triple digits. We could see some record high temperatures in the Washington, D.C. area today as well. Meanwhile, heat really building out west as well. Of course, Phoenix we know is hot, but we'll have to even watch hotter temperatures as we go through the next couple of days. The northern tier, the northern plains, Billings, 103 degrees today. Look at Phoenix tomorrow. This will rival a record high for Phoenix with high temperatures around 114 degrees. Phoenix high temperatures will stay there 110 to 115 for the next few days, with a little bit of relief as we go into Tuesday. Lindsay, and then we're tracking some severe weather chances today. We'll talk about that in just a little bit.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir. I'm from Phoenix. I'm going to be hearing all about that forecast when I call my parents. Trent, thank you. Well, the Labor Department dropped its July jobs report. We're going to break it all down and the impact on your wallet ahead. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of today's top stories. Massive protests in Nigeria have left at least 13 people dead. A rights group in the country says police fired tear gas into the crowd as hundreds of protesters rallied against Nigeria's economic crisis. More than 300 were arrested. SpaceX launched another batch of internet satellites into orbit overnight. This comes after the company suffered a rare in-flight failure last month. NASA is relying on SpaceX for several major upcoming launches over the next few weeks. This includes sending a supply ship and astronauts to the International Space Station. The Senate failed to advance a major tax bill that would have provided significant relief to lower-income families. The legislation, known as the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act, would expand the child tax credit and lift an estimated 500,000 children out of poverty. Despite clearing the House with bipartisan support earlier this year, Senate Republicans largely opposed the measure, and it fell short of the 60 votes needed to advance in the upper chamber. Back now to our top story, an emotional reunion on U.S. soil. 3 Americans are freed. After years of imprisonment in Russia, Evan Gershkovich, Alsu Kermasheva, and Paul Whelan were greeted by the vice president and president when they briefly landed at Joint Base Andrews late last night, before arriving in San Antonio this morning for medical assessments. I want to bring in CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer. So, Elizabeth, what are official Russian sources saying about the swap?
Well, the tone has been very self-congratulatory. The foreign ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, remarked on the extraordinary composure and competence of their security services and political players. A different tone from the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov. He protested quite a lot. In fact, he made a real point of denouncing suggestions that Russia had been making bogus arrests of Westerners, especially Americans, to take as political hostages in order to trade for Russian prisoners abroad. He called that idea absurd and unjustified, although the U.S. and its allies believe that is exactly what Russia's been doing. RIA Novosti, the main Russian wire service, features video of President Putin at the airport hugging the prisoners, footage that was played and replayed and will be playing all day on Russian television. Putin has congratulated especially the FSB agents who participated in setting up the swap and has announced he will give them all special military awards.
I want to ask you, before we let you go, about something that Evan Gershkovich said as he left Russia. His parting wish was to be granted an interview with Putin. Any response?
Very brave thing to say. I was surprised that the Kremlin answered. Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman, said that, yes, the Kremlin is ready to consider it, although, frankly, it's pretty hard to imagine how it could actually take place, at least safely for Evan.
What a journalist. All right. Thank you so much. I want to go down to new data from the Labor Department, which shows the U.S. added 114,000 jobs in July. Dow Jones economists had predicted an increase of 185,000 jobs, so below expectations. And the unemployment rate rose to 4.3%. This is the highest point it's reached since October of 2021. CBS senior business and technology correspondent Jolene Kent joins me now with more. Jolene, what do today's numbers say about the state of the U.S. labor market?
Hi, Lindsay. It says that the labor market is slowing down faster than expected, and the markets just do not like this. I'm watching the S&P right now, the S&P 500 down more than 2%. The Dow Jones also down nearly 2% as well. And what we're seeing here is concern about if the labor market is cooling off too fast. What we've seen is unemployment tick up to that July number. And what it essentially means is if you look back over the past 12 months, we, according to the SOM rule, are entering the very early stages of a technical recession. And this is something that a lot of consumers and shoppers have been telling me as we've been interviewing folks all across the country. Even though the economic data to date has been quite strong, it has been very tough for consumers to feel good about spending money with inflation slowing down, but prices still very much going up. And so this is a jobs report that certainly the Fed and Chair Powell are looking very closely at. The market had basically expected that September would be the first rate hike of about a quarter point, and that still holds. And in fact, it becomes more certain now. Now the market is pricing in a possible half-point rate cut, which could be good for people who are trying to get into the housing market. But the question now is, should the Federal Reserve have cut rates on Wednesday when we were all sitting before Fed Chair Powell asking questions about whether or not holding rates was going to be too late to preserve a soft landing. We're seeing some major bumps in the road right now, but you can see the markets just don't like this jobs report. It raises questions about the health of the labor market, and it also raises questions about what the Fed will ultimately have to do in September. And let's remember, when that September decision comes out in mid-September, the Fed will have been able to look at the August jobs report as well. So we'll get more data on the health of the economy, but there's a really big question about the proximity to the election. It'll be less than 2 months before Election Day, right? And you already have former President Trump criticizing the Fed for a possible rate cut come September. I pressed Fed Chair Powell on this in person this week at the Federal Reserve, and he says that the Federal Reserve will remain apolitical in all of its policy decisions, that it does not take into account the pressure or the policies of either presidential candidate, past, present, or possibly into the future. But this is a jobs report that certainly is not just weak, but it's disappointing for the markets. And you can bet that the Federal Reserve is looking at this very closely, thinking, OK, what are we going to do come September? And what does this mean for workers and for the health of the overall economy, Lindsay?
OK, Jolene Kent, we know you'll continue to watch it. Thank you.
Thanks.
In California, there are growing efforts to curb gun violence, and one of those is through a gun buyback program. CBS Bay Area reporter Itai Hott has a look at what happens to the firearms when they're returned.
Here, in John Rogers' workshop in East Oakland, something remarkable is happening.
So I'll cut this one here.
Guns once capable of taking life are being transformed into instruments that nurture it.
They're beautiful, but they're also made for war. They're made for killing.
For the last couple of years, John, a sculptor and blacksmith, has been part of a national movement that turns surrendered weapons into gardening tools.
I'm an anti-gun violence person, definitely, so I feel very strongly about it.
Called Guns to Gardens, the program allows people to turn over their firearms, no questions asked, in exchange for a gift card and a garden tool made from the decommissioned weapons.
This is the barrel, and so I'm going to let that cool for a little bit.
Today, John is taking an old Stevens 320 shotgun and making it into a hand shovel.
I'm using the same curvature of the gun. I'm just opening it up into a shovel shape, like a flower unfolding in a way.
In addition to the gardening tools, for the last 3 decades, he's been forging old pistols and rifles into dragons, critters, and mythical creatures. Growing up in a military family, he was introduced to firearms at an early age. Since then, he's witnessed the devastation of gun violence firsthand, after a close friend was killed in a murder-suicide. What do you hope people are going to get out of this?
I think just to further the discussion of how guns relate to our culture, how violence relates to our culture, how our adrenaline addiction relates to our culture.
In the last few years, we've had a significant uptick in shootings year after year.
Oakland Police Captain Steve Valle says programs like Guns to Gardens have helped get hundreds of firearms off the street.
I think that's a very powerful way of repurposing guns back into the community for a very positive thing.
For John, it's a chance to disarm hearts while making the world a little bit safer.
It's transformative. It's lead into gold, or in this case, lead into green.
Breathing new life into instruments of death by creating tools loaded with meaning.
Our thanks to Itai Hott for that. Well, the women of Team USA have been on fire at the Paris Olympics. We're going to recap the latest golden performances at the Games and bring you the latest standings. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. We want to take you now to the White House lawn. The president is leaving for Joint Base Andrews, where he'll travel to Wilmington, Delaware for the weekend. And he spoke to reporters moments ago. Let's listen.
What key qualities should the vice president be looking for when she picks her?
I'll let her work that out.
Why did you drop out? Why did you drop out? Why did you drop out?
We're not giving up. We're not giving up on that. You want me to tell you ahead of time so he doesn't get out?
All right, so first off, it was a little hard to hear the reporter's questions. He was asked about what kind of questions the VP Harris should be considering when picking her VP. He said, I'll leave that for her to figure out, and then was asked about Mark Fogel, another American being held overseas, and he was saying we're not giving up. Was asked to follow about it, and he said, well, do you want me to tell too much so it doesn't happen? So there we are hearing from the president as he boards Marine One. Well, let's shift gears now to the Olympics. It was a big day for American women in Paris yesterday. Simone Biles balanced, vaulted, spun, and tumbled her way to gold and was joined on the podium by teammate Suni Lee. In the pool, Katie Ledecky has made history, becoming the most decorated American female Olympian of all time. And the women's fencing team won their first ever team fencing gold medal for the U.S. So co-host of CBS Saturday Morning and a CBS News and Sports correspondent Dana Jacobson has more on all the action. I mean, Dana, these women are on fire.
Simone Biles, she is the GOAT. There's no doubt about it. She had the sparkly goat necklace afterwards, which created a little bit of controversy, but not too much. I mean, think of it this way if you want perspective. She's just the third gymnast to ever have won 2 individual golds, individual all-around golds. She's the first one to have done it in 60 years, and she's the only one who has done it in non-consecutive Olympics. There was a little bit of, shall we say, shade being thrown on social media today. So singer Ricky Davila put up a post and said, Simone Biles getting it done, the greatest gymnast, she's the GOAT, and she's dominating gymnastics in her black job, a reference to former President Trump there. Simone Biles wrote back to him and said, I love my black job. They were not, though, as you mentioned, the only women who were on the stage last night. Katie Ledecky, perspective here. She now can win a 14th medal tonight. If she does that, she just extends that lead over other athletes. She's already the most decorated American Olympian, but that gold medal would put her in rare company because only one other athlete from the Olympics has won 9 golds, and it's a Russian gymnast from the 1960s. You mentioned the fencing team. Let's point out here, as they put it, this is like 100 years in the making. Fencing is not the sport we all think of, right, Lindsay, when we are thinking of the Olympics for Team USA. And I do want to say to you, your Frenchman and Arizona State, not alumnus yet, but your fellow Arizona State Sun Devil, Léon Marchand, great in the pool the other night, and he'll be back there tonight as well.
We'll be watching. And by the way, I don't know what the controversy is about her wearing a goat necklace. I mean, she is the GOAT, and we see male athletes celebrate their accomplishments all the time. I'm just saying. All right. I want to ask you also about something I'm really looking forward to. One of the fastest sprinters in the world, Sha'Carri Richardson, returning today after being disqualified in Tokyo, that heartbreaker 4 years ago. What can you tell us about her anticipated debut?
Well, if you heard her proclamation about coming back here, she said, I'm not back, I'm better. And she has approached this in a very different way. People have said that, she's really taken on the responsibility of her sport, understanding her place in it, that she just has a deeper respect for everything going on. She went out there in her first run, absolutely blew the competition away, so moves on to the semifinals. And we'll see this weekend if she can live up to that expectation of taking home gold. But if you have a memory of her from back before Tokyo, before she made it, she had the colorful wigs always. She still has the fantastic nails, of which I'm jealous of. But she's toned it down maybe a little. But she said, make no mistake, I'm loud, I'm here, I take up space, and I'm still doing that. It seems that she's just channeling it in a different way, and perhaps that's what's paying off also on the track right now. And like I said, we will find out when she's got that final.
Okay, Dana, thank you. A federal judge tossed out a jury's $4.7 billion judgment against the NFL over its TV subscription known as Sunday Ticket, which it was accused of overcharging for. Last month, the jury awarded damages in the class action lawsuit to residential and business subscribers who paid for the package of out-of-market NFL games on DirecTV. But the U.S. judge in California said the testimony of 2 witnesses for the plaintiffs used flawed methodologies and should have been excluded. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with another look at the national forecast. Hey, Grant.
Hey, good morning, Lindsay. And guys, I mean, a lot of us, in fact, more than half of the country starting the day underneath some sort of heat alert. The heat across, especially the southern states up into the Northeast, is already in full effect. Look at some of these current temperatures. New York City, 87 degrees. Washington, D.C. on their way to likely tie or maybe even break a record this afternoon. Temperatures right now at 88 degrees. The heat continues all the way across the south and then into the western states. Phoenix right now 92, building heat. We could see a record high temperature as early as tomorrow afternoon. This afternoon, temperatures also climbing into the triple digits. Well, 110 to even 115 in some places. Look at all of these heat alerts in effect across the country. Several places underneath excessive heat warnings to just heat advisories. It's a hot day across the United States. It's also going to be a rainy day. Several places up towards the Ohio Valley into the Northeast are going to have to watch out for some flooding later on this afternoon. Also, the tropics beginning to really warm up. A tropical wave moving across eastern Cuba this morning. It moves into the eastern Gulf of Mexico over the weekend. The National Hurricane Center will begin to issue advisories, which means we'll get a cone and we'll get some alerts at 11 o'clock Eastern time this morning. This is the area that we'll have to watch for some storms today. Some of these storms could produce some damaging winds and the potential for flash flooding. Lindsay, back to you.
All right, Grant, thank you so much. A lot more news up ahead after the break. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Well, the Stone Canyon fire in Colorado continues to burn, and it has impacted more than 1,500 acres of land. But one group is really trying to assist with the wildlife there, rescuing horses out of the path of the fire. CBS News Colorado reporter Gabriela Vidal has more.
It's here at the Colorado Horse Rescue in Longmont.
We've been a safe place for horses to come.
Where horses like Blackjack and Woody have escaped from the path of the Stone Canyon fire.
We have taken in 5 horses from this current evacuation.
5 successful evacuations Catherine Gregory credits to a tool she launched just this spring called horsealert.org.
It's been critical for the horse community because the only resource there has been in the past is Facebook.
Horse Alert connects horse owners to drivers with trailering capacity who can help get them to safe locations.
The drivers that are closest to the horses that need to be evacuated, they get texted first, and they can accept those horses and let the owners know they're on their way.
A database of over 350 volunteers.
We spent 45 minutes scrolling through Facebook trying to find somebody to help, and within 5 minutes of signing up for the app, we had found a person to help.
Like Blake Holloman, who responded to the growing need.
It was pretty easy in comparison to helping people through Facebook and such.
Amidst helping others connect to resources to help their horses, Gregory has also had to evacuate her home in Lyons this week.
It was a bit stressful to get my dog and my cat out.
But Gregory remains on high alert and hopes other horse owners do the same.
Have a plan. If you don't have a trailer, have a plan of people that'll help you, or sign up on horsealert.org to have people ready there to help you get out.
All right, let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the last look at the forecast. Hey, Grant.
Hey, Lindsay. So, look, August is here. You kind of expect the tropics to begin to hit up, and that's exactly what we're seeing this morning. Over the last couple of days, things have been relatively stagnant, tracking a tropical wave moving across the Caribbean. But now this morning, you look down the bottom of the screen there, at the bottom of the globe, you see that little cluster of cloud cover. That's a tropical wave, Invest 97L, that is slowly moving across eastern Cuba and will eventually move into the eastern Gulf of Mexico over the next couple of days. And once it moves into the Gulf of Mexico, it starts to move over some of those warmer Gulf waters, and we expect some organization to slowly beginning to take shape. Here's what it looks like right now. It is a cluster of showers and storms producing some heavy rainfall. It's just not organized right now. Now, there is a 90% chance that it becomes a tropical depression or a tropical storm over the next 5 to 7 days. But again, once it moves into those eastern waters of the Gulf of Mexico, that's when we'll really start to see how this system is going to evolve. That said, the National Hurricane Center will begin to issue advisories for potential tropical cyclone 4 beginning at 11 o'clock this morning. And that just means they will now issue advisories, so tropical alerts, as well as issue a cone because of the potential of that development. Some of the forecast models do take it up to the north, and they're in pretty good agreement over the next couple of days. There is some uncertainty, though, on how quickly it develops once it tracks off the southeastern coast. That'll really be something to watch over the next couple of days. The main concern for Florida and the southeast is going to be the heavy rainfall. Some places over the next few days could pick up as much as a half foot of rainfall. Lindsay, back to you.
Okay, Grant, appreciate the update. Have a great weekend. We'll have a lot more coverage for you all day long. An encore of CBS Mornings is next. I'll see you back here at noon Eastern on CBS News 24/7.